Hello and welcome to ASCP and the Rogue Pharmacist with Benjamin Knight Fuchs. In each episode, we will explore how internal and external factors can impact the skin. I'm Maggie Stasek, ASCP's Program Director, and joining me is Ben Fuchs, skincare formulator and pharmacist. Hi, Ben.
Hello, Maggie.
When we think about skin color and pigmentation, melanogenesis is at the center of it all, but the process is far more complex than just making melanin. Ben, can you break down what's really happening?
Yes, that is probably the number one complaint for folks, older folks. Kids, probably acne is the most important complaint, but I would say the number one complaint for people, for women, especially as they get older, dermatological complaint is hyperpigmentation. Wouldn't you say that as an esthetician? You think?
Yeah, probably.
And not only is it a problem because, it's people don't like the way it looks cosmetically, but it's also a problem because it's really hard to treat. And it's kind of interesting how a lot of the treatments for hyperpigmentation can actually cause more hyperpigmentation. Like peels, for example, and lasers and ablative therapies, which is really what the most common treatment for hyperpigmentation is, to get rid of it, ablate it away, either with a peel or laser or something like that. But if you're prone towards hyperpigmentation, a peel can cause more hyperpigmentation, or a laser can cause more hyperpigmentation. And obviously, you're going to have a very unhappy patient if they come in for hyperpigmentation and you cause more hyperpigmentation. So what the heck is going on? Why is hyperpigmentation so difficult to treat, and why is it so common? One word: stress. Hyperpigmentation, melasma, melanin, melanization is part of the generic stress response in the body, and it's tied in with stress chemistry. Stress is kind of a weird thing because when we think about stress, we think about our credit card bills or our family or our jobs or whatever. But stress, really, from a biochemical perspective, is a survival threat. And it's not about our credit card bills or our family. It's about getting eaten by a lion. Or in the case of melanization, it's about the sun. And these represent survival threats. And you can't really override a survival threat because you don't think it looks good. In other words, when the body senses its survival is at stake, which from an evolutionary standpoint, that's what melanization is protective against, it doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter, whether you like that dark patch on your skin or not. To the body, that's critical. And that's why it's so darn hard to eliminate with our topical strategies, or even our nutritional strategies a little bit easier. But our topical strategies make it very difficult to treat. And there really isn't an effective treatment for hypermelanization because it is so tied in with the stress response. And as I said, some of our treatments are actually making things worse. Topically, you're really not going to be able to address melanization except for with hydroquinone or retinol. I like retinol because retinol, you get anti-aging benefits. I hate hydroquinone, even though I do have to make it in my pharmacy because it's so toxic. So hydroquinone and retinol are pretty much the only topical strategies you have for dealing with hyperpigmentation from a chemical perspective, although alpha hydroxy acids can probably help a little bit in peels. So what's going on with the whole melanization thing? Well, when we stress the body out, the stress manifests itself through hormones. And the major control point for hyperpigmentation is going to be the hormone system. Melanization is responsive to estrogen, it's responsive to cortisol, and it's responsive to insulin. Those are the three major hormonal control points for melanization. And so if you really want to address melanization, you've got to address it at the level of the stress response. The steps that are required to produce melanin are very difficult to interfere with. And there's some peptides that you can use that will interfere with those steps. And in fact, I use a couple of those peptides that will give you some effect. But mostly you're going to be dealing with those three hormones. That is insulin, estrogen, and cortisol, stress hormone. So the best way to deal with the melanization pathway is to deal with the stress response. In the case of insulin, which we talked about earlier, the best thing you could do is lower insulin levels by lowering blood sugar levels. And that seems to me like the easiest way to control hyperpigmentation from the level of insulin is keep your blood sugar stable. Now, you can also use nutritional supplements that will help your body process sugar, and that will keep insulin levels low. And there's lots that you can use. The B vitamins, particularly vitamin B1 and B3, thiamine and niacin, are very important. Magnesium and zinc are very important. And by the way, magnesium and zinc deficiencies can also be associated with hyperpigmentation and excess melanogenesis. So those are a couple things to think about. And a lot of people are deficient in those two vitamins. In fact, those two minerals. Those two minerals are probably the two most common mineral deficiencies. And considering that they play such an important role in sugar metabolism and insulin secretion, and ultimately in pigmentation or hyperpigmentation, it seems like that might be one of the causes for people, at least a minor cause, if not a major cause, of our melanization crisis or hyperpigmentation crisis that dermatologically a lot of people are going through. So supplementing to help control blood sugar and then ultimately control insulin can be helpful. Alpha lipoic acid can be helpful. Sulfur and selenium are also important, and selenium deficiency also is associated with hyperpigmentation too, by the way. And then estrogen. That's a little trickier because we have this love-hate relationship with estrogen, and there's a big misunderstanding with estrogen. I just had a conversation with a friend of mine yesterday. I went to a naturopath, and there's a book that came out that said estrogen, fear of estrogen is misplaced, and it's a big myth. Not true. Estrogen is a very problematic hormone, particularly for the stress response. So that's one of the reasons why people who are estrogen dominant, you probably heard that term, estrogen dominance, have things like anxiety and depression and nervousness and jitteriness. And a lot of that has to do with either excess production of estrogen or out of balance estrogen. I'll tell you about that here in a second. Or exposure to xenoestrogens or foreign estrogens, or incomplete detoxification of estrogen. And all of these play a role in ultimately in high levels of estrogen, which can lead to hyperpigmentation. Anybody who's dealt with what's called the mask of pregnancy, when women are pregnant, their estrogen goes up and they can end up with these raccoon eyes, and they call that the mask of pregnancy. Women on HRT are more susceptible to hyperpigmentation issues. The thing about estrogen is a very, very, very powerful steroid hormone. It's the most powerful of the steroid hormones. And so the body has to eliminate it. And there are mechanisms in place in the liver and in the intestine, and the gallbladder actually, that help the body eliminate estrogen. However, if you got intestinal problems, which is a lot of people, dysbiosis, messed up gut bacteria, which is a lot of people, liver problems, which is a lot of people, gallbladder issues, which is a lot of people, what can end up happening is you can end up with elevated levels of toxic estrogen, incompletely processed estrogen. So while estrogen is an important hormone, it has to be cleared out quickly. And if you're dealing with any of those issues, intestinal issues, liver issues, or gallbladder issues, which is a lot of folks, you can end up with functionally toxic estrogen, high levels of functionally toxic estrogen. So clearing out estrogen becomes a very important strategy for reducing melanogenesis for the melasma patient. And that's things like fiber for improving bowel movements, probiotics or good bacteria for improving bowel movements, lecithin or phospholipid supplementation for improving bile secretion. The amino acids glycine and taurine can help with bile secretion. Anything you do to protect the liver. If you have issues with blood sugar, that's probably the most important reason for liver problems, fatty liver, they call it. And these days, like a third of Americans, 100 million plus Americans have fatty liver disease, which is crazy because that's a serious health challenge. And it's almost to the point now where people think it's normal to have a fatty liver after a certain age, and it's definitely not normal. So correcting liver problems is very important. And then also using supplements like, I don't know if you heard of DIM, I3C. Yeah. In fact, DIM was created by a guy in Boulder. I don't know if you know that.
Oh, I didn't know that.
By a doctor in Boulder, anesthesiologist in Boulder. And I was actually one of the first pharmacies to work with DIM back when he developed it. But anyway, DIM, I3C. One of the ways estrogen is cleared is through a process called methylation, which I think we may have talked about methylation in the past.
I think we did, yeah.
So methylating agents like SAMe can be very helpful. There are amino acids. Choline can help with methylation. There's something called betaine, which can be helpful for methylation. So improving methylation is important. Using cruciferous vegetables. In fact, anybody who's got hyperpigmentation issues or estrogen issues, I think cruciferous vegetables are a woman's best friend, personally, especially older women, because they're so important for liver health and for hormonal health. And then balancing estrogen is also important. Progesterone. In fact, I have a nice progesterone serum in my pharmacy that we sell for people who are estrogen dominant or dealing with estrogen problems that are causing hyperpigmentation. Progesterone deficiency may be a more common problem or a more important or relevant health problem as women get older than estrogen deficiency. Estrogen is made in fat, in body fat. So as long as you have body fat, you're going to make some estrogen. Progesterone levels tend to drop much more precipitously than estrogen levels. And this can lead to a problem of estrogen dominance, which can be associated with hyperpigmentation. So using progesterone creams, progesterone serums, I don't know about the progesterone troches or the internal progesterone as much because they'll spike your progesterone and then the estrogen levels will drop where you get a steady state of progesterone with the topical progesterone. Pregnenolone, have you ever heard of pregnenolone?
I have, yeah.
Pregnenolone can help balance out estrogen for problems with melanogenesis. And then there's also the whole cortisol issue, which is associated with psychological stress, physiologic stress, as well as, interestingly, hypoglycemia, low blood sugar. So cortisol can be handled by stabilizing blood sugar. That's one strategy. Also using reducing stress, of course, psychological stress is also important. And then there are nutrients that you could use to balance out cortisol. Vitamin A, vitamin E, and they also have vitamin A and E will also help you with your estrogen too. Pregnenolone for anti-cortisol and all your sugar metabolizing supporting nutrients will also help with cortisol. Oxygenation or slow deep breathing techniques is a great way to lower cortisol also. So for melanogenesis, you're not going to be able to really control it by hacking into the pathways because they're so tied in with the stress response. In fact, the production of adrenaline and the production of cortisol are linked in to what's called the melanocortin system. And the melanocortin system not only produces melanin, but it also produces stress hormones. So it's very difficult to hack into the melanogenesis biochemical pathway because it's so tied in with the body stress response, which the body considers a survival threat. However, by hacking into insulin, and I don't want to say hacking into insulin, but by manipulating insulin through dietary strategies, manipulating estrogen through improving detoxification and elimination and balancing it out, and then also by working with stress, with psychological stresses as well as physiologic stresses, and using supplements, you can help stabilize cortisol, and that will also help with melanization. Topically, you're going to be stuck with the really retinol or hydroquinone. Vitamin C will have some skin lightening effects. It's really lame, and I don't know why people still use these things. The tyrosinase inhibitors, herbal. I've never seen anybody get rid of hyperpigmentation. Have you ever?
No.
Never.
Yeah.
And kojic acid and these kinds of things. And companies will tell you, oh, it's a tyrosinase inhibitor. Tyrosine, by the way, is an enzyme whose conversion is important for the production of melanin. And there's an enzyme called tyrosinase that's important for that conversion. Tyrosinase inhibitors, the thinking goes, will inhibit the conversion of tyrosine, the amino acid tyrosine, into pigment. So that's where the logic of tyrosinase inhibition comes from. But in all the years that I've been doing skincare, and it's 40 plus years, I've yet to see anybody use a herbal tyrosinase inhibitor or a phytochemical that has tyrosinase inhibition properties and have their skin lightening improved. So you're really going to be using retinol, hydroquinone, even tranexamic acid. I don't know if you've heard of that one.
Yeah.
Doesn't really work very effectively. But retinol and hydroquinone will work. And then peeling the skin is also a strategy, but you just got to be careful because the skin's already destabilized. You can cause more hypermelanization.
If somebody is dealing with hyperpigmentation, whatever the cause, if they are then using, like as you're saying, say retinol, they have to consistently use the retinol to treat and suppress the melanin topically.
Absolutely.
But let's say they determine the cause internally of that hyperpigmentation, treat it, heal it,
It should go away.
all the things, they'll see that go away.
100%. But that's easier said than done.
Yeah.
And then also retinol has other benefits too. So you want to, retinol is one of those. And to me, the big three, or even the big four of skincare ingredients for anti-aging that everybody wants to use all the time are retinol, and not the fake retinol either, not the faux stuff. Vitamin C, and again, fat soluble, the water soluble is problematic. And then hydroxy acids, whether it's beta or alpha hydroxy acids, and then ionic minerals, which I don't know have we talked about ionic minerals? We should talk about that. You've heard about mitochondria, obviously, right? The mitochondrial issues, I don't want to digress here, but I will. Mitochondrial issues are behind a lot of health and skin problems. We're frying out our mitochondria by our lifestyle habits, particularly excess calories and sugar. And stabilizing mitochondria is very important for overall health, but also for hyperpigmentation, because defects at the mitochondrial level in a cell will cause cellular stress that can lead to pigmentation. So keeping mitochondria healthy are very important. And vitamin C is, a lot of folks don't realize this, but vitamin C plays a very important role in mitochondrial health. And that's another reason why vitamin C is so important. But also ionic minerals, electrical minerals are very important for keeping mitochondria healthy. So maybe we can talk about that on another podcast.
That concludes our show for today, and we thank you for listening. But if you just can't get enough of Ben Fuchs, the ASCP's Rogue Pharmacist, you can find him at truthtreatments.com. For more information on this episode or for ways to connect with Ben Fuchs or to learn more about ASCP, check out the show notes.